Hi everybody, my name is Mike. I'm editor of Bella Caledonia, and I'm also a member of the Enough Collective, which runs the Scottish Degrowth Commission. And we've been doing work around the climate crisis for the last year, looking at the deeper issues that it presents us with. So we wanted to do one in our series of Upending Conversations about the media and looking about the media's response to the pandemic. So I'm going to just outline some thoughts for 5 or 10 minutes or something, raise some issues, and then we're just going to have a conversation and open it out to everybody. So the pandemic media looks a lot like the pre-COVID media. It has all the same flaws and fractures and problems. They just seem to be hugely amplified in the light of the virus. We'll be sharing some links and notes for you in the chat section and publishing this talk later on the Enough website. But I'd like to start by saying, not all media is bad, and not all media are the same. And it's really important to celebrate good media organizations and good journalism where they exist. And they exist in many places and in many forms, and we'll see some of them over the next wee while. Because I think the Trumpian line that the media is a cancer that has in some senses transferred over here is deeply reactionary, and that's not really where I'm going. At the same time, I think you can have a critical take on the media and its responses to climate change and climate crisis and the pandemic without going there. So we'll try and navigate through that difference. I think we need to also make some distinctions between the broadcast news, print media, and tabloid media within that, and online journals and sources. The tabloids have been predictably terrible most of the time, acting as some kind of patriotic cheerleaders for Boris and speculating endlessly about when lockdown would be ended, as if that's, lockdown became synonymous with liberty and closely mirrored some of the language of Brexit. On Friday, the Daily Mail published a front page deriding militant unions and imploring the idea that we should let our teachers be heroes. So this was the idea that the NHS and other frontline staff were already heroes. This was people that the Daily Mail would normally be castigating and abusing, but they're heroes. And what we needed to do was to open up the schools to let our teachers be heroes too. And this sort of framing of frontline workers, who the Mail would normally be attacking, was mixed with sort of fetishizing volunteers and charity fundraisers, which all went to make out that the NHS was some sort of charity. And we all needed to have some kind of big jumble sale or something, and then everything would be all right. So we've got this weird framing by the tabloids about heroes and about fundraisers. And all of this is mixed up with a sort of understanding of Britain's response to the pandemic as being the same as the Second World War. It was the Blitz spirit again. And this is a sort of default position for a lot of the British media, in particular the tabloids. Anyway, you knew that the Daily Mail isn't that great, so maybe we should move on. And I wanted to show you one of the first links that we can share, which is from the New Scientist, which has been very good. And this is a story they ran on the 19th, 2 days ago. Coronavirus set to cause biggest emissions falls in Second World War. And this is a story by Adam Vaughan, their climate editor, which says that the coronavirus pandemic has already driven a 17% drop in global CO2 emissions this year. Now, we were due to have a 1% rise in this year, so a 17% drop is actually astounding. If the kind of Second World War fetishists had been on the ball, they would have noticed that this was the steepest fall since the Second World War. So I just wanted to point that out because this is one of the facts that we need to pay attention to as we go through this and study what the media have been doing. basically it's proven that the decline in economic activity that degrowth activists suggest is necessary is already being played out here. So that's worth noting. Second link I want to share with you is from Carbon Brief, which is an excellent resource. It's carbonbrief.org, and it repeats this story but with a bit more detail. It says, previously Carbon Brief analysis showed that the crisis temporarily cut CO2 emissions in China by 25%, with emissions still below normal more than 2 months after the country entered lockdown. So we see substantial authoritative resources repeating this story. The third link is also a Carbon Brief story. This is from the 12th of May, where they say India's CO2 emissions fall for the first time in 4 decades amid the coronavirus. An economic slowdown, renewable energy growth, and the impact of COVID-19 have led to the first year-on-year reduction in India's CO2 emissions in 4 decades. So we begin to see a picture here of really credible, authoritative sources building up this picture of the impact around the world. The third link I think to share is, the fourth one is from the London Economic, which is, again, repeating, COVID-19 crisis sees global carbon emissions plummet by 17%. We need systemic change through green energy and electric cars, not temporary reductions from enforced behaviour. So they're being able to make the distinction that these kind of reductions are pointless if they are forced and temporary, and that we need to be able to make some lessons from this and build strategically out of the crisis, not bounce back. And that's a really important picture we're seeing as we go through this. But that's not a picture that is picked up in a lot of the rest of the media. And in the fifth link I want to share, it's from Lunchtime Live, BBC Scotland's lunchtime news story. And it's a report by Hayley Miller on the 21st. No, it's not. It's from a few days. It's from the 19th. And you can listen from 1 hour and 21 minutes in from the link that we'll share. And basically, it's a news story which is all about why we need to start buying cars again. And it's a news clip that goes on for about 5 or 6 minutes. And it's saying about how it's essential that what we need to do is get the car industry back up and running. And she's interviewing somebody in Manchester because there actually isn't a car manufacturing industry in Scotland at all. So it's kind of a ridiculous point anyway. And in it, when you listen to it, she says, there's some real problems because there isn't actually a demand for cars in Scotland. So we'll need to artificially create one. And you're left at the end of it just thinking, man, this is our news. This is our news. And no editor or producer or journalist has gone over this and thought, this doesn't make any sense. Why are we putting this story out? There's no manufacturing in Scotland. We've just reduced air pollution. We were in the middle of a climate crisis. Why are we getting people, when everybody's cycling and walking and getting their head around that and enjoying that? But what we need to do is just get people to buy cars. So I think this is the beginning of looking at sort of the real failure of the media to get their heads around this at all. I think the BBC Scotland is particularly atrocious about this. It's had a number of failings in the past year where it's transgressed its own guidelines on climate reporting. And I think this is really a media management problem because they don't seem to be able to enforce their own regulations or train their own staff or have anybody with any editorial competence in charge. Then we see Emily Maitlis in our next clip. Emily Maitlis, who was recently widely praised for an introduction she did to Newsnight, where she kind of slated the government for their response. But in this clip, what she's doing is is basically berating the unions. She's saying that the problem with getting back to schools is the terrible hardline unions. And this is a kind of repeat of the Daily Mail line coming down now from broadcast media. So this is an extraordinary framing of the situation where we have to get back to normal. We have to have the same economy. We have to have everything back the same. And so what we need to do is rush everybody back to school. And the only thing that's stopping us doing this is these bloody unions with their, rights and concern for people's health, And that's seen right through from the tabloids down to senior broadcast media in the BBC's flagship programme. I think the other thing that the pandemic has exposed and stretched is the understanding of devolution. With the lockdown being released a week or so earlier in England than the other nations, we've seen some kind of hilarious consequences of this. And we'll share, I don't know if everybody in England just don't understand devolution at all. And then this is really replayed again. There's another clip coming up from Sky News at 10, where the reporter, I'm sorry, I don't know what her name is, but she is really struggling. And this is from last Sunday. And she says she's struggling with the idea of different lockdown opening times and sequencing. And she sort of stutters and says, this is a terrible problem. I mean, Scotland, Wales, and the United Kingdom, the English state nation. And she just doesn't really, she's a senior Sky News journalist, and she obviously doesn't really know the difference or is able to articulate at all. For her, England and the UK are kind of completely conflated. And it's kind of just extraordinary after this many years of devolution, that a senior journalist just isn't able to understand this in any way at all. So I think that the pandemic media is very mixed, but is struggling. I think that there are some good things going on. I think there's been a flourishing of DIY media. There's people in lockdown who are being very creative. There's a great show called You Call That Radio, which broadcasts on Facebook Live every night for an hour from Glasgow. It's a kind of cultural mix, but it's very fresh, very lively, very competent. And it does make you think, my God, we've got these broadcast media with huge resources that kind of struggle to do basic understanding. And I think the problem I'm going to wrap up so that we can open up this to discussion. But I think the problem for the media in general is this: they don't think anything needs to change. And most of their energy is spent celebrating a sort of normalcy that was destroying our planet and undermining our communities before this pandemic arrived. And so the result is that the many gains we made during the pandemic, as the economic system halted, the gains that we can see and we've proven, the gains in air quality, the gains in understanding and self-reflection on work, life and education, and the reductions in emissions, all are going to be undermined because the media almost wholesale is encouraging just us rush back to the same system and the same lifestyle that we had before. And so it's not just a case of hating the media, it's a case of that's a critical failure point in us making any gains from the experience that we've all had and that we're all still living through. In some ways, this isn't a surprise, but we need to capture some of that back, because we're in risk of coming out of lockdown too early, losing all these gains, and then rushing into the old crises and problems that haven't gone away whilst we've been in lockdown. So I hope these notes and links are helpful to you, and maybe we can open this up for discussion. Thanks.